1975, the year that the Vietnam War finally ended, only for a couple of new ones to start. But it was also a year of great joy in the world of technology and even gaming, because this was when the engine that spearheaded both personal computing and home gaming was created. A small team of former Motorola employees, led by Chuck Peddle, managed to create the MOS Technology 6502 microprocessor. This name may not resonate with you as much as the Intel 8086, which would come in a few years, or the Motorola 68000, which was still half a decade away, unless you're a Futurama fan, because that was Bender's microprocessor, the one in his head at least. I believe he also had an Athlon somewhere. But without a doubt, without the 6502, there would be no home computing. It was used for everything from the Apple II to the Atari 2600 and even the Nintendo Entertainment System. Not only was it a powerful processor for the time, reaching up to 3 MHz, but it only cost $25 at a time when the Intel 8080 that featured similar speed cost in excess of $300 at the time. Currently, it would have been over $1,700. I can't overstate the importance of this processor. There would be no personal computing without it, and computing in general would continue to be reserved for people capable of spending thousands and thousands of dollars for an unproven machine with very little market share. Kids would not be using these. This was also the year when we got their first touchscreen, the resistive kind, thanks to George Samuel Hurst. It was also the year when we got the first portable computer in the form of the IBM 5100, a machine that cost back then between $9,000 and $20,000 without the inflation, and had a weight of about 24 kilograms. I said it was portable, not practical. Microsoft was founded this year, its first task being porting BASIC to the Altair 8800, Unix hit the market, and Kodak developed the digital camera and didn't really market it out of fear that it would hurt its film sales. And so, within 3 decades, the company would fall into obscurity, putting an end to over a century of innovation in terms of cameras and film and pictures in general. Returning to the world of video games, in 1975, Pong became a household name. Almost. Atari entered into a partnership with Sears to sell a home version of Pong under the name The Sears Telegame. The console was built by Alan Elkhorn, the creator of Pong, and 2 other engineers from Atari named Harold Lee and Bob Brown. The partnership between the 2 companies, however, would not really last all that long, because next year Atari would go solo, and technically so would everyone, with many clones to follow. The Magnavox Odyssey, the original one, was discontinued this year, being replaced with the Odyssey 100 and 200. Each with their own dedicated games, were still not all that evolved beyond what the original had, but now with the ability to draw its own lines and bars, so there wouldn't be that much of a need for an overlay on the screen. Atari was responsible for a first this year, the first movie tie-in game, Jaws. So technically, it was called Shark Jaws because Bushnell couldn't get the rights to Jaws, but the shark part wasn't really all that visible on the arcade cabinet. This was in a way also among the first horror games, that being the brand under which Atari sold it. The basic idea is that you were supposed to catch a fish while being chased by a large shark. So it wasn't really based on the movie, but there was a shark in it. Meanwhile, in Germany, a doctor of engineering named Rainer Forst created the first first-person driving game named What Else? Nürburgring 1, which was to shape the way in which first-person driving games are created, because there weren't any up to that point. And among the first video game air combat simulators came out this year as well, in the form of Taito's Interceptor. It wasn't the first flight sim, because there had been many made up until that point by the Air Forces, usually involving hydraulics and other things than just electronics and a screen with lines on it. But the most important innovation in gaming would come again from the university mainframes. This was the RPG revolution. In 1975, we got not 1, but 4 role-playing games in the sense that we know them today. Dungeon Crawlers, game where you would take the role of a hero with different stats, collecting equipment, gathering gold, killing monsters, buying things, selling them sometimes, traversing a labyrinth where death is certain, you even got to fight them once. Among the first ones made was a game known as P-Edit 5. It wasn't the first one of its kind. That honor may belong to M199H, which was lost to time. P-Edit 5 had the proper name, that was The Dungeon, a very common name back then because of Dungeons and Dragons, and it tasks you with navigating through a dungeon, defeating your foes with magic or might, and usually making a brand new character with better stats just a few minutes later because you were killed by a skeleton somewhere in a dark, dingy corner. The game was created by a man named Rusty Rutherford at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign on the popular Plato network, and it wasn't alone. At the Southern University of Illinois, Gary Weisenhunt and Roy Wood created the ND with small letters. There's also one with capital letters, which is a different game. This was an adaptation of the pen and paper game Dungeons and Dragons, which was released a year before by Dave Anderson and Gary Gygax. The full name of D&D was The Game of Dungeons, and unlike The Dungeon, it wasn't just about running around, getting loot and killing stuff and then restarting because you died, though P-Edit 5's role as the precursor to the roguelike genre cannot be understated. D&D gave you an actual goal, that of collecting a pair of artifacts, an orb and a grail, as well as slaying a fierce dragon that is believed to be the first boss to ever appear in a video game. Also around that time there came another game entitled Dungeon, created by Don Daglow of the Claremont University Center for the PvP-10, and then another one also named Dungeon, created by John Dalasky, Gary Fritz, Jan Good, Bill Gamel, and Mark Nakada. It too was developed as an adaptation of Dungeons and Dragons and seemed to stick very closely to the source material. Sadly, it doesn't seem to be available on the Cyber 1 Plato emulator anymore. It used to be there, but it didn't really seem to be working, so now it's not there at all. And if you found the whole naming scheme up until now too confusing, the next one will prove a bit more easier to understand. It was named Moria, and it was created by a few people also at the University of Illinois, mostly out of interest in the subject based on the work other people were doing on D&D. According to one of the creators of Moria, Kevin Duncombe, he had not actually played the pen and paper Dungeons and Dragons game or read Lord of the Rings when he made it, but someone working on it probably did, otherwise it would be a really strange coincidence. The game stood out because it featured a town to which you could return to and even haggle over prices with the shops, something you can't really do today with a lot of shopkeepers in modern games. All of these titles were played by many people through the Plato network, people that enjoyed them, people that wanted to improve them, people that would soon turn them into very different and innovative experiences meant to improve society as a whole. But more on that in a few weeks. It's hard to pin down exactly which one would be considered a game of 1975, since most of them were built on top of previous ones, or they were even inspired by each other. I would say that Moria was the more complete of them, the most competent, but not having the ability to play Dungeon, I can't say that for sure, so just this time I'm giving the title to all of them, to all the games entitled Dungeon, or that try to emulate Dungeons and Dragons and bring the role-playing experience to the masses in an electronic form. Not to discount the importance of the home version of Pong, but it's been here twice already in one form or another. Come back next week when the adventure truly begins. Goodbye.